Welcome back, Herle Burlyites. After our extended pause for the election campaign, the weekly Herle Burly is back, and I could not be more pleased to have as our guest today Brad Wall, the 14th Premier of Saskatchewan, currently Special Advisor to Osler, Hoskin, and Harcourt. But I know him as a guy that founded a political party, led that party to victory, won 3 times, was the Premier from 2007 to 2017, and none of the elections he was in were even close, and retired on his own terms. So congratulations, Brad, for all that, and welcome to the Herle Burly.
Oh, David, it's just a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me on. And I'll just make one correction. What you just said was very generous. There's one thing I'd correct. I wasn't actually there for the founding of the party. Credit goes to those 4 liberal MLAs and 4 progressive conservative MLAs who thought, 60 years of vote splitting on the center-right doesn't seem to make a lot of sense since we agree on almost everything. Why don't we throw in together and build something new in the Sask Party? And I remember where I was, I was the economic development director in my city, and I'm in my office and listening to the news on CKSW radio and Swift Current. And this news came on that it was actually the day before. I had an inkling of this because one of my former current friend, I had an inkling that this was going to happen, but it was officially announced. It was August of 1997 that this thing was announced, this merger, and I was fist pumped. I was like, doing a little happy dance in my office. I just thought I sort of had lost my interest in politics, provincially or federally, since about 91 through till then. That was 97. But I had a lot of interest thereafter when that announcement came out.
For sure. Well, your version of history is the only one in which you will not be given some credit for the formation of that party. So you're being humble.
No,
let's start with some.
I appreciate that. Yeah.
Let's start with some really important things. Notably, your T-shirt. You are wearing a Waylon Jennings T-shirt. Now, Brad Wall and I are not going to agree on everything in this conversation, but we deeply agree on Austin-based outlaw country music of the 1970s. We deeply agree on this. We both share a love of Jerry Jeff Walker, but Waylon Jennings and Willie Nelson were the leaders of that movement. And you have taken your love for okay, I love Elton John, and I own Bernie Taupin's guitar. I own the guitar that Bernie Taupin wrote all of Elton John's lyrics on. What do you own?
Wow, you own that guitar?
Yeah.
That's crazy. That's absolutely crazy. Congratulations. Well, I'm lucky. I have, in 1973, Waylon Jennings had 2 gold records for RCA Records. He had Lonesome Henri and Mean went gold, and the tipping point record, I'll call it, Honky Tonk Heroes, written entirely by Billy Joe Shaver, went gold. And I think that sort of is ground zero for the so-called outlaw movement, actually, that record. And the story behind Billy Joe and Waylon meeting at the Dripping Springs reunion, and that Willie would put on before it became Willie's 4th of July. And how Waylon had promised to cut some of the songs and had probably forgot a little. I'm sure they were maybe having a drink or two when they were meeting that first time, and I'm not sure Waylon remembered him telling Billy Joe that he was going to cut all these songs. I've read Waylon's biography, and that seems to be the autobiography. That seems to be the direction he's going in the account. Anyway, Billy Joe Shaver doesn't forget it, right? Because it's Waylon Jennings saying, I'm going to cut a bunch of your songs. And Billy Joe Shaver shows up at the studio. I think he was still not at Hillbilly headquarters, which is where Waylon moved to after he sort of got free of the rules of Nashville a little bit. He might have been still at RCA Studio B, I guess it would be. But anyway, Billy Joe Shaver basically yells at him from the street, is the account I hear. And after Waylon threatens him with the security and all manner of other things to beat it, he says, finally, all right, play me one song. And if I like it, play me another. And if I don't like it, I'm paraphrasing all this. Obviously, it's not direct quote. And if I don't like it, these guys are going to throw you out. Of course, I don't know what song Billy Joe played him first, but he liked it. Cuts the whole record. Anyway, back to the car. So 73 is the year. 2 gold records in RCA. Knows that Waylon has this affinity for old Cadillacs, all Cadillacs throughout his life. And they buy him this white 73. You know what we could do here? Because I'm not wired up here. And I'll just hang on a second.
You gonna show us the car?
Well, why not?
Jesus.
Just talking about it. We're just talking about it.
Absolutely.
So there, can you see it? Do I have to flip it around?
You have to flip it around.
Oh, yeah. Well, here, I'll flip it around.
Oh.
I don't know if I can do that on Zoom. Let me see. You know what? I'll just do this. So there it is.
Look at that.
I don't know if you can see it.
Oh my God! Look at that beauty.
There's what I have it in car shows, so it's weird. It has probably two different area codes, one for the hood and one for the trunk. We had this, not sure you can see it, but a little sign made up for car shows, but that's Waylon's 73 Eldorado, and I attended his estate auction a few years ago, and there's two of the things, a couple of gold records that we got here that hung at his house. I don't know if my camera works crappy. Apologies. This one's my favorite, though, is it's the icon. It's that one.
That's right.
Really in Waylon, and so Mamas Don't Let Your Babies is on there.
Grow up to be cowboys.
2003 minus 20. Yeah. It's just a great record. It's not supposed to be that way. Is on that one, and we also picked up his. They auctioned off
Honky Tonk Heroes on that one.
A Grammy plaque. I don't know if you can see that. There it is. No, Honky Tonk Heroes is not this one, but that was one of the gold, the records for which RCA felt they should buy Waylon his car. So anyway, it's a neat story. Waylon doesn't. He has. I got to know, and she's a wonderful lady. Waylon's assistant. That's what the sign says here, David. And so I got to know her basically through Coulter, our son, and then through Shooter, Waylon's son. I got this connection. And so I'd asked her, I said, I think I'm buying this car. It became available online. Waylon had it first, put 50,000 miles on it, gave it to his son, Buddy Jennings, and then Buddy Gates sold it to the bass player that still is playing bass now. Used to play with Waymores, and then it got sold to another guy in Arkansas, I think, and that's where I picked it up. Anyway, this sign, basically, I asked her, so did he drive it? And she says, and I quote, he definitely drove it many times. It was garaged at the old house on Old Hickory Boulevard. Waylon loved cars. He had many different ones and would often trade out what he drove, but was always most fond of his black Cadillac. He did have a yellow one, right, an orange one, a gold one, and this white one, and a baby blue one. She says he also has a black Corvette, a maroon-colored Jaguar, which he gave to his lawyer. So she doesn't expand on that, but let's remember that Waylon had a big hit with a song he wrote called "Don't Y'all Think This Outlaw Bit Has Done Got Out of Hand," and it's a story that recounts the fact that he was the feds busted in on a recording session of his, and pretty sure he had cocaine in there, and he did, except his drummer and someone else took action and got rid of the evidence, I guess, as it were. And so I find it interesting that Maureen says he had a Jaguar that he gave to his lawyer, because of course they still put a charge when he got off. So maybe that here's a present. Thanks for your help. Anyway, there you have it. That's the car.
So there you go. I'm glad you got it off. I'm glad you got it authenticated, so it's not like the time George bought John Voight's car on Seinfeld.
That's a great episode. That's a great episode. How did you get that guitar?
After 9/11, there was a concert to raise money for the first responders. It was an all-star concert in New York to raise money for first responders. And as part of the fundraising effort, all the artists involved put items up for auction. And I bought it on the auction.
Brilliant. Just brilliant. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
we shouldn't leave this subject without saying that your son, Coulter, is a hugely successful and innovative country music singer himself. I don't know how many records he's got out, but I've listened to quite a bit of the music. And if you like traditional country music, and if you like Johnny Cash, and I don't know if he likes that comparison or not, but if you like Johnny Cash, I think you're going to like Coulter Wall.
He does. It's an oft heard, but thank you. That's very kind. And he's that comparison's made often. He's not comfortable actually with it, only because he doesn't think he's in that league. So it's a John R. Cash. But yeah, it's traditional country, and it's there's a lot of folks making it out there. Some great Canadian talent, some great Saskatchewan talent. I mean, the Dead South kind of does this fusion bluegrass rock country thing, but it leans into the tradition when it comes to lyrics and themes. You might have heard of them; they're great. And of course, Cord Blund's been at it for a long time. He's been doing much more sort of traditional and Western stuff. That's the other thing. It's one thing to do traditional sort of old school country, which is rare enough. But then a lot of these guys, both included, have been doing Western music, and that's an even rarer thing. But there's it's maybe a bit of a renaissance. I don't know, but it seems to be kind of coming back. You better not. Your business plan, to the extent you have one as a singer songwriter, better not. And you're doing that stuff. Better not be about getting it on the radio, because that ain't going to happen. Radio is all about pop country now, and sometimes it's hard to distinguish between pop and country. It's sort of this homogenous, like the genders have all kind of gotten real close together. So you got to find another way to do it. These guys are trying. They tour, well, with COVID notwithstanding, they tour their butts off and just try to make a bit of a living. But good. I kind of like that kind of music too, so I'm glad there's a bunch of them out there that are prepared to do it. Right. Another guy you might like too, David, I'll recognize. His name is Charlie Crockett. He's actually a great grandson of Davy Crockett. Great singer-songwriter. And another guy that's on Coulter's label, I'll give a shout-out to, is really good. Vincent Neil Emerson is really good. And another label mate with him on La Honda Records are the Local Honeys, which is a duo out of Kentucky, and they're ridiculously good as well. Riddy Harmon. Now, one last one for that same label. Riddy is out of Harmon is out of lives in Montana now. I think works in the ranch. She's quite a singer-songwriter.
I did not expect to get a playlist out of this show. That's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
So, Brad, you and I actually come from the same neck of the woods. We're separated by 3 years. I'm 3 years older than you, and you're retired as Premier of Saskatchewan, so it's just another reinforcement of my inadequacies and failures. But we come from the same neck of the woods, and I'm from Prelate, Saskatchewan, and you're from Swift Current. Right. They're not far from each other. What do you think my chances of getting elected in Cypress Hills grasslands are, Brad?
It depends what party you ran for. If you were prepared to shock the world, your chances might be pretty good. I think it was interesting to watch what happened here. I mean, in Southwest Saskatchewan, as you know, this is sort of it was part of the big L, ironically enough, as you know, because the Free Enterprise Party in this province, for the better part of the last 60 years, 70 years, up until that fateful day in 1997 when the Sask Party was formed, were the Liberal Party. They were the center-right alternative, and arguably, as you would know, much more conservative or right-wing, I guess, in terms of economic policy than their federal cousins. Is that fair? Especially in the 70s.
I don't think Ross Thatcher would have liked Justin Trudeau.
Yeah, that's right. I don't think he liked his dad, is what I understand.
No, he didn't.
Yeah. So
he refused to deal with them. He would only deal with Turner.
Oh, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that doesn't surprise me. It really doesn't. So, you could run and win down here. I mean, you're one of the best at winning campaigns from behind the scenes. Just step out front, get a blue shirt, and away you go.
All right. Well, we'll continue this conversation. I don't think a Herle Burlyite still exists that doesn't know I'm a proud son of rural Canada, Prelate, Saskatchewan, rural municipality of Happyland. Head west from Regina on Highway 32. The importance of rural connectivity became abundantly clear during the pandemic, but I'm going to guess most people don't know what actually goes into connecting Canadians that live outside of cities. Our presenting sponsor TELUS does, and it isn't as easy as putting up a cell tower. Miles and miles of fiber optic cable are laid over some of the toughest terrain. I mean, it's Canada, right? And wireless solutions are used for areas where fiber isn't a viable option because the community is too far away from necessary infrastructure. But for wireless to work, you've got to have spectrum, essentially radio waves that make your cell phone work. Spectrum is a public resource controlled by the government, and a spectrum license is basically permission from the government to provide service in a certain area. But here's what's happening right now in rural Canada. Too many communities have their spectrum controlled by companies who've done nothing with it and will eventually resell it for millions in profits, instead of actually using it to improve connectivity so people can live, work, learn, and thrive. Not TELUS, a technology company with a social purpose. TELUS believes you either use the unused spectrum and put it to work for all Canadians no matter where you live, or you should lose it. Full stop. And they've made it their mission to work urgently and collaboratively to provide that high-speed digital connectivity to 100% of Canadians and Indigenous peoples living in Canada by 2025. You can find out more at telus.com/connectingcanada. So let's get to it. What do you think of the election? What are your thoughts on what happened on Monday night?
Well, I mean, it was pretty clear after week one that we were going to get to some sort of a minority and not beyond that. And then, except for some maybe temporary euphoria for Conservative supporters in week two, I think a Liberal minority was pretty much expected by most observers. Those people, those nerds like us that pay way too much attention to that and give up life in some respects, other potentially more interesting activities in life. And but you and I are other fans. Even when they have O'Toole winning at halftime, I'm like, this does not make me feel, as a conservative, I don't feel particularly confident because I've been to Mosaic Stadium too many times and left with a country music broken heart. Okay. So halftime leads it. Anyway, so I just think so long answer story, but I think that there's not much surprise here. Would you agree? I mean, was that where you were at? From day one, as you know, the first day is so important. The people are kind of paying attention, maybe more so than they have through, except for the debate day. It might be the day they pay the most attention to the news when the election's called. So that's your chance, isn't it, as leader of a party, to make your case, to frame your ballot question, to use buzzwords. And in Trudeau's case, he had one further task, and that was to basically justify why we were having an election when he really wasn't having any problem governing. And we all know all of that. We don't have to sort of canvass all of that again. And so he had the double pressure, I think Trudeau did, of explaining why we were going to have a pandemic election, and secondly, then also what's his ballot question. By the way, I don't think any party leader, well, maybe with the exception of Singh, but I still don't know what Aaron O'Toole's ballot question was, other than we're not that guy, which was, even though he had a very, I think, full and credible platform, I think that campaign sort of came down to that in the end. And so I don't think anybody should have been too surprised.
Yeah, I think the Liberals lost their majority on opening day, on the day they called it, because I had a focus group. I did a focus group of swing voters from BC and the 905 area code around Toronto the day before the election was called. And you know how little people follow politics, but yet everybody in this focus group knew that he was going to call an election. And everybody knew that he was going to call it in order to get a majority. And so that was the bar of cynicism that he had to overcome the next day. Right?
Wow, that is powerful. And as you know, focus testing can be very instructive in these things. It can be more... People would perhaps on the outside would question, well, how can a room full of whatever it is, 9 or 11 or whatever many people you have on your panel, David, how can that be a substitute for a 2,000 sample poll? Well, on diving, the deep dives need focus testing. If you want to get down, sort of below the surface for people, what maybe their horse race preference is, or just their initial reaction to anything, those focus tests are great for that. It's something that we practiced when I was leader that we put a high priority on. But anyway, I'm on that rabbit tail. The point is, that's a shocking finding in your focus test, that there was sort of this universal knowledge that the election would be called, and also already the beginning of questioning the leader's motives. When you question someone's motives, you're kind of questioning their character. And when you're questioning someone's character, man, that's toxic for a campaign. You're right. Day one, then the chance for a majority is out the window.
Yeah. So, what is your critique of the Trudeau government? I presume you didn't vote for it. So, what is your critique of it?
You know, sometimes when I'm asked to speak at a conference, and now I don't generally do that, but I'll participate in panels or those one-on-one Q&A things, and we get into this sort of thing. What do I still look for in my political parties or my political preferences? And I always share with folks, and also then encourage them to consider this as well, if they would, that they should always vote for an economy first candidate and or party. I mean, preferably, I guess it's going to be the same ones, the same thing, the candidate and the party. And what I mean by economy first is I don't mean a political party that in government won't care about issue, you know, the social issues, won't care about healthcare, won't care about things like reconciliation. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying they're try to discern whether that candidate or the party is an economy first. All those other things are important, but an economy first candidate. Realizing, of course, that without a strong economy, without the economic freedom for women and men in this country to create jobs for themselves and others, we don't have the appropriate opportunity then to expand our tax base, not raise taxes, but raise revenue, because it expanded the base in a growing economy. And that's the only platform upon which we can afford government programs. It's the only way to sustain the kind of social safety net and social programming we want. And that sustain is the important word there. You can have them and run up the deficit. And it's why, you know, so, for example, Chrétien and Martin, that was an economy first team. And I say in speeches now, and surprise a few people, that, man, I would really like for that version of the Liberal Party to be the current version of the Liberal government. Because this government is not an economy first government. This is a government led by a man who says, I don't really think about monetary policy. And I believe him, by the way. I don't think he was lying. So anyway, it's a rambling, long answer, but I think that's what
let's dig into it. So other than the fact that the Liberals didn't spend 5 minutes in the election talking about the economy, what gives you the impression they're not focused on the economy?
Well, they're not. Yeah, right. I mean, they're just not. You can take a look at.
Right.
I guess you can go to the files of the Government of Canada press releases and look through them and find out, well, what was the government talking about for the last 4 years, 6 years?
Right.
And unless I've been not paying attention at all, I think that it would be pretty evident that they're not concerned about the economy. It's climate change, and and they'll say this is our number one priority, and it's some of the social justice issues. And again, not saying those aren't important. They are important, but right. I want a prime minister and a cabinet that's saying, look, we got to make sure this economy can grow in the short, medium, and long term, so we can sustain the quality of life for all Canadians and sustain the kind of spending that government wants to do to maybe intervene here and there or help folks out. And and they've just been unserious on trade. I really still have trouble with the tickle trunk tour of India. It's hurt us there, and I guess we felt it a little bit more in Saskatchewan because, as you probably know, in any given year, up to 40% of Canadian exports to India come from our province, right? It's amazing. Uranium now, we've got a nuclear cooperation agreement as a result of work that we did with the Harper government. That's a small amount of it, but mostly it's food and fertilizer. It's potash and dal and pulse crops.
Yeah.
So imagine imagine prairie farmers watching this disastrous and incompetent and really reckless tour of India happen with the different costumes and, you know, knowing the connections that our province has economically to India and the dialogue that happens on a regular basis. I can promise you that there's a hangover from that. So I think there's been an unserious approach to trade and an unserious and just not a lack of interest in the economy. And I don't think we need that. We didn't need it then, and we sure don't need it now coming out of the pandemic. And so I'm hoping that you can convince some of the old Liberal guard to somehow go in and do a sort of a quick palace coup and switch back to the Liberal era, the Liberal days of Chrétien and Martin and their approach.
Yeah, good luck to me. So I didn't look at the O'Toole platform with a microscope, but I was not aware of any fundamentally different economic vision from the Conservative Party in this election campaign.
You're right. I mean, I think what they did, there was a calculation in their platform that they wanted to de-risk a vote for the Conservative Party for those in the center who wouldn't, and then maybe center right, maybe even the center left. I don't know who might have been frustrated with Trudeau, but not convinced that the Conservatives had changed, had modernized, to use a word that O'Toole uses, and so there was a lot of platform pieces in there that would speak to that. We did things like that in 2007 when we tried to defeat a 16-year New Democratic government that had, by and large, had provided pretty good government for the province. Frankly, I mean, we were arguing against important things, and I stand by those arguments, but they weren't as unpopular, I don't think, as say Mr. Trudeau was. But we did the same thing, and we made sure we had our policies. For example, education property tax, which was a huge issue in rural Saskatchewan. That was an important plank in our platform. But we didn't talk about it at the time. We made sure it was known, but through having other agents of our campaign go out there, and I had one way on it too, on the campaign trail, maybe more than one, but we featured other things more that we knew would resonate in urban Saskatchewan. We had our internal war room plan, our plan for that election was hold what we have, find the next 6 best ridings in terms of how we did in the last election where the margin was closest, but we didn't win. Focus on those. And if the tracking shows that we've closed that gap, then let's find the next 6. And those were all those 6s were in urban Saskatchewan. Excuse me. So we had to make sure that's where we campaigned. And I think O'Toole did the same thing. Here's what I'm frustrated about the O'Toole campaign. And I said so on the election night on Global, or maybe on one of the other shows, I'm not sure. They actually had a pretty good platform planks around Western Canada. They talked specifically about not getting rid of Bill C-69. I don't think they used that language, but making some necessary changes. That's the so-called anti-pipeline bill, air quotes. There you go. Shout out to the show. And also the silly one-way tanker ban bill, which is really silly. I mean, it bans oil from leaving the country off the West Coast, but not coal, for example, like a huge export out of Vancouver. I mean, it's all in the name of climate change and I guess potential maritime disasters when it comes to the environment. But you got coal and you got theoretically tankers that could come the other way. Right. So it's bad policy as well. And the Conservatives committed to getting rid of it. And then they also committed to a discussion around fiscal federalism and how we structure that in the country. And of course, that's equalization and it's transfer payments. And so those are powerful things that were in their platform. And I don't think we talked about them. I think there was a brief mention in an exchange between Singh and O'Toole at on the English debate. And I was wondering, why aren't you sending Candace Bergen out on a mini tour of the West, or Michelle Rempel-Garner, or Scheer, the former leader, somebody to go around Western Canada as part of the campaign and say, this is in the platform. I mean, they clearly were not afraid of being hit over the head with it by the Liberals, maybe, or they must have been, because they put it in the platform. It was right out there for all to see. But it doesn't do you any good if Western Canadians actually, and other resource voting Canadians that sometimes happen in rural Ontario, wherever they may be, if they don't know about it, that you've got this important economic package that is also resident in Western Canada, then what's the point of having it there? I'll tell somebody. And I hope they do now, because O'Toole might be under some pressure from the base in Western Canada, who would say, all right, well, we tried it your way, and that didn't work either. It's exactly the same result. So maybe we retrench back to some more, policies that we're more comfortable with out here. And O'Toole has the chance, I think, now to say, no, here's what we had in the platform. It's right there. And it's because I just think Westerners don't know that it's there.
So the party looks to me, the Conservative Party looks to me like it's headed into an existential conversation about its very nature, led by O'Toole's attempted shift to the center in this campaign. And people are going to say it failed. But I'm not sure it was really tried. And I'm going to ask you this question and build in a bunch of assumptions that you may disagree with. But you formed a party, the party that you led was a combination of conservatives and liberals. And you had a reputation in Saskatchewan of being a different kind of conservative than they were seeing on the national level. When I talked to my friends in Saskatchewan, they would regularly compare you to Harper as somebody that had a more compassionate, softer side to him and ran a government that was a little bit more human than the Harper government. And you know that two things. A, you can't create that positioning in a few weeks in an election campaign. And secondly, you know that you've got to take out of the window some of the clear things that people associate with that other thing if you're going to do that. So I'm not sure that the move to the center was really attempted. So I guess my question to you is, how do you feel about this existential discussion that the party is having? Does it double down on true blue conservatism and, as Andrew Coyne said, try to move the center to them? Or does it move to the center to try to get elected?
Yeah, it's a great question. By the way, that would be a great campaign for a party slogan. The Saskatchewan Party, we're a little bit more human. I kind of like that. I'd have to give you credit for that. Although I am not in a position to implement that new slogan at all, of course. We put water in our wine on policies. I'll get to the compassionate part here in a minute. But when I became leader, we threw out all the policy for the party and started over with regional meetings that culminated in a big policy convention. And we didn't throw out the principles of the party, which are about, smaller government and all the things you'd expect from a sort of free enterprise-oriented, conservative-oriented government. But we started over on policy. And as you know, we knew that Saskatchewan people, even conservative voting Saskatchewan people, like their crown corporations and wanted them protected. And so we changed our policy to be unequivocally in support of the ownership structure of crown corporations. It wasn't easy to do because the base of the party, a small base actually, though, to be fair, wasn't real keen about that. And we made some other changes. I said to our team and our caucus, even when we were in opposition, working on our policy and our platform for that coming election in the fall of 2007, I said, let's surprise people. Let's surprise Saskatchewan people. They're going to have a certain stereotype about us. And let's blow up a bit of confirmation bias by talking about stuff and proposing action about stuff that they wouldn't expect to hear from us. And I think conservative parties have to do that. And you're not going to surprise anybody by talking about monetary policy, or I should say, in the case of the province, fiscal policy, or what are we going to do with the capital tax, or how do we grow the economy? What about export growth? None of that will surprise people who expect that from a conservative party. I wish we would have done a bit more of that on the campaign. Actually, that might have helped a little bit. There's a lot of days in the campaign you can squeeze more of that in there, but he did certainly more than any of the other leaders. However, you can surprise people if you talk about issues that they expect other parties and the center-left part of the spectrum to talk about, and maybe your solutions you're proposing aren't exactly what they would propose. Exactly. But you're identifying, you're telling folks, like, we get it. This is an issue. And so we have some thoughts on that. People ask me, what's one of the, what moment in your government gives you some of the most pride? And it's hard to pick one. I was glad to be a part of a lot of cool things. But, the social services minister in Saskatchewan, now the finance minister, Donna Harper, came to cabinet one day and said, when she was social services, said, there are, I think it was 144 people with intellectual disabilities that are on a waiting list. What were they waiting for? Well, they were waiting for the dignity of a home, like a group home. And their families were on waiting lists for respite programs, because these families care for those kids and their adult kids most of their lives in many cases. We had a bit of luck in the economy at that point, so that had translated into some revenue. And so we just was able to say to Donna and as a cabinet, we said, can you bring back what it would cost to eliminate that wait? Let's get rid of that wait. Let's get rid of that wait list completely. Now, is that a conservative thing or a liberal thing or a democratic thing? In our case, I can say that that's just a Saskatchewan thing, and I would say it would be just a Canadian thing too. If you've got the resources and you can literally help those who are least among us, which I think should be that's the requirement of everybody involved in politics. Again, we might have different ways to get there. You know, the conservative-minded person might say, let's make sure we have enough jobs for everybody to support, and for those that can't work, so that we have programs to help them. And someone else might say, no, let's have a $20 minimum wage or a program and not worry about, the job part. But everybody, they would all, I think, there should be a requirement of all involved in politics that you just want to leave things better than you found them, and you want to help those who are most vulnerable. So there was our chance. And I'm not sure Saskatchewan's people, I think they were a bit surprised that would be a priority that we would have. Now, that was after we had formed government, but it's a long, rambling Grandpa Simpson way of saying, I think that O'Toole is on the right path here. And the Conservative Party needs to realize that they do have to grow their party. Now, interestingly enough, you look at what do you think about this, David? So we were talking about what O'Toole's got to do. What do the Liberals have to do? Is this the second election in a row that they're mired in the low 30s? Conservatives got, closer to 35% this time. And their average over the last two, I think, is 34 in terms of percentage people that are voting for them. I think the Liberals got a similar issue. They better ask some similar questions of themselves, because this is not going to be attainable in the long term.
No, they're not getting many votes. They're not getting many votes either. I joked on Twitter on election night that if I had known that you could form a government, win an election with 31% of the vote, we'd have done it in 2006. Because that's exactly the percentage of the vote we got in 2006.
That's a great. I missed that tweet. That's a good one.
So I've talked a lot on this pod about the duties companies like our sponsor CN have to the public. The duty of safety, the duty of providing unfailing service to customers, the rather awesome duty of carrying a significant chunk of the Canadian economy on its shoulders. But publicly held companies, and that is what CN is, have another duty. Simply put, they must keep up in a ferociously competitive business environment. They must turn a reasonable profit and provide value to their shareholders. Fail in that duty, and it doesn't turn out well for anyone, customers, shippers, grain farmers, and manufacturers included. So CN is launching an ambitious value creation plan. It will push out the boundaries of efficiency using its vast store of railroading expertise and the bleeding-edge technology it's acquired in recent years. It intends to provide an even better return. I'm not going to get into details like operating ratios and share repurchases and capital expenditures as a percentage of revenue, but they are essential parts of CN's plan, and it wants its investors to understand that. CN's massive advantage is its 19,000 miles of track, spanning Canada and the United States. One of the company's biggest investors recently called it the finest railway network in North America, and he was right. CN's new strategic plan is meant to keep it that way. How would you suggest the party deal with an issue like guns, which is so laden with symbolism, both in rural Canada and in urban Canada, but exactly the opposite kind of symbolism?
Yeah. So, I mean, the gun issue basically, to me, is problematic if the discussion's around assault weapons. And as you know, some of what the Liberals have classified as assault weapons aren't, frankly. They look scary, but they're not. But it's hard to define that. I mean, what is that? As you know, we can be shooting gopher, a 22 that we used to shoot gophers out in the prairies. If you ask a gopher, they'd say, well, that's an assault weapon. I mean, depending on how a weapon is used, it could be an assault weapon. I don't need to be glib about that. But so rather than react to the Liberals, next time I think the Conservatives need to say, look, here are the kinds of guns that really are tools in this country, or they are used for hunting. We're going to be about protecting the rights of people to own those. We've got a lot of gun laws now that protect the citizenry from sort of a profusion of long rifles or handguns. But I think that, if I was going into the next election, I would just try to avoid always playing on the Liberals' turf. They define everything then. And when you're explaining, as you know, David, when you're explaining, you're losing. So if you're explaining how, no, our decision, we're not really talking about assault weapons. The Liberals say we are, but we're not. You've lost. You're done.
They look like it. I showed people in my focus group the Liberal ad on attack ad on guns, and it had the pictures of the guns that were under discussion, and people recoil, right? Because in urban Canada, the only legitimate use people can think of for owning a gun is hunting, and those don't look like shotguns. They don't look like hunting rifles to people. So
true. That's the problem. And some of them are. By the way, some of them are. Yeah, some of them are. Some of those assault-looking, or like the ones that you're talking about, are they could be. They're deer rifles. They certainly can be, and they're used for that sort of thing. So and where I'm from here, and where you're from originally, it is. There's a tool. There's a pest control and a livestock protection function utility for these things, and but I get it, right? You're showing, and the Liberals got it too, and I do think that was a moment in the campaign that's sort of where the wind was starting not to be quite fully in the sails of the Conservatives.
Absolutely, that was the first big counterattack from the Liberals on that. So more existential than guns is climate and energy and that whole bundle of issues. I think this is the most important thing I want to learn from you today, is how can this country be a full participant in the global fight against climate change and not completely fuck the oil-producing provinces of the country, and second of all, not rupture the federation? How can we do this in a way that keeps the country unified? We actually won't accomplish it if we can't keep the country unified. So we need to figure out a little different way here, I think. Do you have any guidance on that?
Well, I threw a note at the federal Conservatives before the last election, for whatever it's worth, David. Honestly, I just said, there needs to first the communications campaign in advance of what I'm about to recommend as a Conservative policy would need to be massive, because once again, it sort of ceded the ground to the Liberals on this whole pricing pollution thing, and people in this country, in the midst of forest fires, in the midst of whatever they're going through, of a drought on the prairies, are thinking, well, we really should do something about it. Thank goodness we're going to pay 3 more cents at the pump, because now we're doing something about it. It's 2.6% of global emissions. We're 2.6% of global emissions. And I would say it over and over and over again, and then use it as a criticism of the Liberal plan. Because the Liberal plan isn't just about pricing carbon, but that's the most of it. That's the heart and center of it. And I would attack it.
Jonathan Wilkinson told me that does most of the heavy lifting of their meeting their objectives.
Yeah,
carbon tax.
So what does that do? It gets us to what, 20-something% less than 20 whatever. So 20% of 2.6%. That's what we're going to save the world, and potentially cost, as you've just mentioned, at $170 a ton. Good luck, right? Good luck for any extractive industry. Good luck for oil and gas. Good luck for families, because there's not a rebate shell game that even the Liberals could come up with that are going to save them from the kind of inflation that will be visited on Canadian families at that price. We've already seen what the impact is in terms of food production and all that sort of thing. So, but back to this question, I would use the Liberal plan against them and said, really, this is all you have to offer? This myopia about a third of 2.6% of global emissions? That's weak sauce. It's not good enough for Canada. And here's what we propose. We propose and then we fill in some blanks, a 3-year or 5-year, $100 billion, I'm making stuff up a little bit here, but just a massive amount, sort of man-moon mission kind of language around solving the problem. In Saskatchewan, we're leaders in CCS. CCS is real and it's effective, and the price is coming down now. They're applying it to different things, cement plants and oil and gas. Maybe that's what our thing is, that we focus on that and help give the technology a way to help everyone who's still burning coal, which isn't just Asia, by the way. Germany and others, Japan, and Australia was moving back towards coal. Or maybe maybe it is, maybe they don't like what they want to talk about CCS, or maybe it's a two-pronged thing. Maybe we're going to drive the cost down and the safety and the efficacy of nuclear power with massive public-private research and this goal, this man. But and then you want to quantify it and say, here's what we think that when we're successful at the end of this, we're going to find that technology because we're Canada and this is what we do. We innovate. When we find it, we will have actually impacted the planet. We'll have, reduced global emissions by X. You can just sort of generally see where I just believe there's a lot of room there for us to go. And maybe you still keep a notional price at $20, I don't know, $20 or O'Toole's Air Miles plan. I don't know. In addition to that, because it's not going to be that debilitating for the economy. But I think you need to use the Liberal plan against it. It's really quite incredible that they've got.
I can't believe they got through the election. I can't believe they got through the election, and nobody mentioned that their price increases is going to raise the tax on a liter of gas by 40 cents.
Right. Or an Apple.
Nobody mentioned that. I couldn't believe that.
Yeah, it was a bit of a failing from O'Toole, but I think the Conservatives are so scared about criticizing anything carbon tax that they just didn't, or the price on pollution, to use the Liberals' term about it. But I really think you got a chance to be critical of the Liberal plan as weak and not sort of living up to what Canada should be living up to in terms of our global mandate, because it only focuses on our domestic emissions. Well, for the most part, there's some other things in there, but mostly it does, and that's not good enough.
But you are an expert in this, and I know nothing. So here's my question. How much of the problems in the oil patch are a result of federal policies, and how much are a result of changes in global investment patterns driven by climate change? Well, I mean, smart economists tell me that money is pulling out of emission-intensive extractive businesses.
Yeah, I think that's true. And that's a more recent development. The federal government has provided headwinds to the oil and gas sector long before this relatively recent trend that you're talking about. I'd say the last 2-3 years. So the short answer there is the federal policies obviously impacted it significantly on transportation side of things, and on the fact that we've really hamstrung ourselves by being able to, by forcing a much lower price for our resource than otherwise would be received, because we don't get West Texas. We all look at that every morning on whatever our favorite news broadcast is, or market report. But we get a differential, as we get that Western Canadian price, which is also less. And really, it's a measure of a lack of transportation capacity. To the extent we're short of pipeline capacity, that gap grows because we sell it at a discount, to one customer, incredibly for the most part. So, but now we do have this other issue, this complicating factor of people making investment decisions for ESG. There's much more monitoring in the oil and gas sector on the ESG front. And I think it's getting harder. It's harder and harder for oil companies to attract investment. There are some a lot of the oil companies, as big and small, are kind of pivoting. They're looking at some rare earth minerals. They're looking at, you can extract lithium on the prairies and some in certain sort of old oil reservoirs, because it all, I guess, geologically works out. Now I'm way beyond my depth.
Really?
And in a way, if that technology proves itself, then lithium from on the footprint of the old oil industry might be a thing. Geothermal's a thing. Helium's a thing. It's using the same rigs, the same sort of footprint in the energy sector. So, and you have companies pivoting to that. You have companies pivoting on the CCS front. I'm involved with Whitecap Resources. Whitecap is the CEOs from Estevan. They're principally producing oil and gas in Saskatchewan and Alberta. Again, full disclosure, I'm a director with that company. But they can credibly claim to be net zero for emissions because of what's going on in Weyburn, Saskatchewan, because of the CO2 that's used first for solvent, for EOR, enhanced oil recovery, and then re-injected back in the ground, monitored, by the way, by the International Energy Agency, and sort of blue check mark for its efficacy as a way to get rid of CO2. So you've got an oil company that's cleaner than a wind company, or a wind business, or a solar business, because they're net negative, right? I mean, And if so I just think that my point is, and there's a lot of other companies in space that are doing some things here, and so I'm hoping that change moves the needle a bit on some of the major sources of investment, the decisions they're making around ESG, to recognize that, judge these companies based on what they're doing in 2021, not what you think they were doing in 2015, because they're all, I think, doing it, especially Canadian ones, doing a pretty good job of pivoting and changing, and that should be there should be credit for that.
Speaking of credit, as I understand it, the federal Liberals are pumping a fair bit of money into carbon capture and storage in Alberta and into hydrogen. And they are building the Trans Mountain Pipeline. The latter, something for which people in Western Canada should be aware that the Liberals are paying a price in central Canada for that, among progressives, buying that pipeline and building that pipeline. That wasn't people in the West say, well, they should have obviously done that, and maybe from a policy sense they should have, but politically it's not obvious that they should have done that. So why do they get no credit for that?
I think the problem is there's been too many on the other side of the ledger. I think Western Canadians, a lot of them blame the feds for the loss of Energy East, for not fighting for KXL, for the Northern Gateway. So I think that the problem is it's a bit of a scoreboard. It's 3-1, and you had to do this one. Rachel Notley asked you to, and you had to. I'm riffing a little bit here, but I think that would be my answer to your question.
Yet I've never heard a federal conservative leader say they would have imposed Energy East on Quebec. I've never heard a federal conservative leader say they would. I've never heard a federal conservative leader say that they would have imposed Energy East on Quebec.
True. Although it's really not up to, the federal government could have helped a lot, but if the Premier of Quebec wants to make it impossible to build the pipeline there, notwithstanding federal approval, he or she will make it impossible, as you know. And I had colleagues who were Quebec premiers who said as much. We were very honest. Who said, we get why this pipeline is important, but it's 2/3 conversion and 1/3 new, but the whole 1/3 new comes through my province. It's not going to happen. But the other thing you said was and the feds have all this money for CCS. Actually, they're causing themselves more trouble in the oil and gas industry, I think, in the conventional side anyway, because they're saying, yes, we'll support CCUS for utilization, but only if you can assure us that none of it will be used for enhanced oil recovery, right? Which is just, and because I think, by the way, I think they're just so ideologically, wanting to move away from anything to do with oil or rhymes with oil, or that it brought them to a place of really bad policy. It's really bad policy, because what we know to be an efficacious way to store CO2 happens after EOR. And we've been doing it for years. There's a track record. As I said, the International Energy Agency has sort of said, yeah, that stuff staying in the ground. It looks stable. I'm paraphrasing. Of course, they don't talk like that. But the feds are eliminating that's, by the way, also the biggest sort of proven or known of the CCUS is EOR and then storage. And it gives it more value. Companies are prepared to pay for that CO2, as they have been in Saskatchewan for a long time down at Weyburn. That was a good project. I think Chrétien, Romano, and the old Pan Canadian is really ground zero for that massive, one of the world's largest enhanced oil recovery and carbon capture and storage projects. So the Liberals are kind of backing off that too. And I think the industry, I think the conventional industry is saying, well, that's ridiculous. You basically tied the hands of our sector to A, benefit from the policy, and B, actually do something about the CO2.
Really? Okay. Since Confederation, owning a home has been part of the Canadian dream. For most people, that dream is much more than just a monthly mortgage payment. A home is where we create our fondest memories and where we can truly be ourselves. For too many, especially young adults, that reality is out of reach, and it's getting worse. The good news is our original sponsor, the Ontario Real Estate Association, or REA for short, has a plan to save the Canadian dream of home ownership. It includes lowering costs for first-time buyers, ending money laundering in the real estate market, and cutting years of red tape that is standing in the way of more affordable homes for families. The OREA plan will lay the foundation for a future where all people can find a place to call home. When we support the dreams of all of us who want to own a home, we're building healthier families, stronger communities, and a safer, more secure future for all. Read their plan at orea.com/affordable homes. Listen, this time is just flying by and we're running out, but I have a huge question to ask you to opine on. And that is the Federation. And I have been essentially describing you throughout this show as a moderate conservative. And unlike me, you're a Saskatchewan loyalist. I moved away. I feel the guilt of that. I feel the weight of that. I do, to be honest. I feel some guilt about that. But you didn't move away. You're there, and you are in some way involved, or have been, used to be, I don't know if you are, with something called the Buffalo Project, which has a pretty strong view about how the Federation is working and whether or not it can work at all. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Well, I was never a formal member of or didn't have standing with the Buffalo Project, but I certainly I tried to help raise some resources for it because it wanted to contest in federal elections on issues as in sort of an advocacy group. And the principle was that we want to advocate for policies that we know are good for the province of Buffalo, hence the name. The province of Buffalo, as you know, was Frederick Haltain thought the next entrant into the Federation before 1905 should be this province of Buffalo, which was kind of like, the map's not quite perfect, but basically it was Alberta and Saskatchewan together. And Laurier quite presciently at the time said, no, that province might have too much power within the Federation one day. And so now we have Saskatchewan, the province that's hard to spell and easy to draw, and Alberta's Alberta. And so that was really the point of the Buffalo Project. And it was, I guess, to the extent that there are elements of fiscal federalism that group, those people do not, I don't, by the way, either think are working. They wanted to be a resource to try to change those things and involved. And I think they still do. I haven't been involved with them for a while to raise money or anything else, but I think they still do.
Does Saskatchewan get a raw deal from the Confederation?
If I could get into a specially equipped DeLorean and go back to just before September 1905 to both provinces and share with them that first of all, don't do this until you get basically the natural resource jurisdiction that you'll have to fight 30 years to get, the NRTA. And by the way, we talked about that in terms of in my speech to raise money for the Buffalo Project. Saskatchewan and Alberta have had good moments when they worked together to fight for certain things within the Federation. Blakeney and Lockheed were a force during the constitutional discussions. And they were a force in terms of getting the notwithstanding clause, something I've used as premier. And yes, it's therapeutic, but I also thought it happened to be good government. But we have that because in large measure because of that. And Saskatchewan and Alberta, though they didn't always agree in prior to May of 1930, when I think there was royal assent to the NRTA, the Natural Resource Transfer Act, they worked together on it. So my point has been Saskatchewan and Alberta are better when they work together. And I think some of the folks involved in the project are of the same view that we wish that would happen. I think Saskatchewan, anyway, if I could get into that specially equipped DeLorean and go back in time, I don't know what I'd recommend. And here's why. I wrote in the National Post about this not long ago that I was in terms of Senate reform, I was for it before I was against it, and before I was for it, because I'm kind of for it again. I'm almost seeing it as sort of the last best hope for the Federation. If we could get to something that approximated not a triple E, two E's, and appointed by premiers, but we would talk about that some other day, maybe just over an original 16 Saskatchewan beer. But we don't have that now. We have a de facto unicameral government. We have one house.
Does Pilsner make me a bad person? Serious. Does Pilsner make me a bad person?
Yeah, it's made in Lethbridge. It's made in Lethbridge.
Okay.
It's okay.
Well, all right.
Yeah, but original 16 is Saskatchewan made.
Yeah.
What? No, that's original 16. That's the employees. I actually was a staffer in the government where the government helped the employees to buy it. buy out the brewery. In fact, that's why it's called Original 16, because 16 employees bought the brewery, and they make a really good Saskatchewan beer. Boy, they better be sending me a case after that. But anyway, we have this sort of de facto unicameral government, right? We have one house. And that house is, I just got the low battery signal. I hope I'm still here. That house is basically constituted on a sort of a rep by pop formula. So wherever the people are, that's who gets the seats. Our constitutional amending formula that might provide real remedy to the less populous provinces kind of goes through the Queen's Park and the National Assembly, and also is a function of the population distribution of the country. So I don't need to be too negative or depressing, but I can't see this ever changing. And so for the regions who don't have a U.S. style Senate to balance things off, what do we think? What are we looking at, David? We are looking at having not very much influence in that rep by pop de facto unicameral government that makes policies for the whole country. So I don't think it's a particularly good federation, frankly. You can't change equalization. As you know, equalization is a function of the Constitution. You couldn't touch it there, and you need the majority of the votes in the House to make meaningful equalization changes, because it's a federal program decided by the federal finance minister. So, not to be too sad and all,
right?
Because I'm really not sad, but I kind of despair a little bit for the state of the federation and the chances for meaningful change, unless somehow we could have David Peterson, who, remember, during Meech Lake, very generously and graciously, they basically said to Mulroney, he didn't give a number or a quantum. He said, I'd probably look at some changes in the Senate, support those. We need a provincial premier like that in either Quebec or Ontario. Or maybe a constitutional amendment that reduces the powers of the federal government to act in areas where there's provincial jurisdiction, joint jurisdiction, certainly. So there's a few things that could be done, but if it stands as it is, the status quo, I don't think it's a strange way to run a country, a federation, I should say.
All right, listen, before your battery runs out, one last question. How's your French?
It's terrible. It's not very good. It doesn't exist. No, it's not very good.
No, you're not working on it?
How's yours?
Bien. Zero. And I lived in Montreal for 2 years. Still can't speak any French. My French is that, I can understand when people like Ed Broadbent speak French. That's my French level. I
always liked it when that's so funny. I always loved it when my friend Premier Salinger from Manitoba would speak French, and he's fluently bilingual. But yeah, I could catch I could kind of catch what he was saying.
Yeah, exactly.
I was like,
au contraire, c'est clair.
Je suis très heureuse d'être ici. Man, I got it. I get that.
You're on everybody's list as a potential leader of the federal Conservative Party. You're on everybody's list.
Yeah, it's wrong. They have the wrong list, and I'm so grateful. I had my dream job. My dream job was the one I had, and I'm really enjoying the private sector more than I thought I would. And so I just have no interest. Sometimes people would say a very kind person.
Most ex-politicians just say that, Brad.
Yeah, well, not this one. I had very kind people in the media would sometimes ask that question and say, "Hey, are you thinking about federal politics?" And I'd say this, David, that presupposes something. That assumes that it's a sort of axiomat that the best political job in Canada is the Prime Minister's job. It's not. You and I both know the best political job, Premier of Saskatchewan.
Well, the prettiest legislature too. That's for sure.
True. Yeah.
Thank you for doing this. Thank you so much for doing this. You give me a lot of time, and I really appreciate it. And well, good luck. And let's drink some beer and listen to some country music back in Regina someday.
Yeah, I can't wait. Great to chat with you. Thanks for having me on. Go Riders.
Great. Go Riders. Well, there you go, Herle Burly. It's former Saskatchewan Premier Brad Wall talking everything from Waylon Jennings' car to carbon capture and storage. Great conversation. Thank Brad for joining us, and it was really fun to talk to him. about all that stuff and connect about Saskatchewan. I want to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, for their support, our sponsor, CN Rail, and the Ontario Real Estate Association, all for their support of this podcast. And welcome back, Herle Burlyites. We'll see you next week.